There I was, enjoying my morning coffee and watching the news when I heard shouting from my driveway. I looked out the window to see Patricia Henderson, our self-appointed HOA enforcer, standing next to my Honda Civic with a massive ring of keys in her hand. She was fumbling through them one by one, muttering angrily to herself. When she spotted me watching, she held up the keys and shouted that she had full authority to move my vehicle immediately. I watched in disbelief as she tried key after key, none of them fitting my car's locks. Her face grew redder with each failed attempt. When the keys clearly weren't working, Patricia threw her hands up in frustration and pulled out her phone. She dialed 911 right there in broad daylight, claiming there was an illegally parked vehicle threatening neighborhood safety. I grabbed my phone and started recording, knowing this was about to get interesting. Within minutes, I could hear sirens approaching, but something told me this wasn't going to end the way Patricia expected. 6 months earlier, I had moved into the peaceful suburban community of Maplewood Gardens, attracted by the well-maintained lawns and quiet streets. What the real estate agent hadn't mentioned was Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who treated every minor rule like federal law. She lived 3 houses down from me in a pristine colonial with perfectly trimmed hedges and a doormat that read, "Bless this mess," in decorative script. From day one, Patricia made it clear she was watching. First, she left a note about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Then, she complained that my welcome mat was 2 and 2 wide according to HOA guidelines. When I painted my front door a deep navy blue, she appeared at my doorstep within hours, clipboard in hand, insisting the color violated Section 12 of the community standards. Each time, I politely but firmly explained that I had reviewed the actual HOA documents and was in full compliance. The parking situation started 3 weeks ago when Patricia declared that my car, legally parked in my own driveway, was somehow extending 3 and past the acceptable boundary line. She claimed this violated the neighborhood aesthetic standards and demanded I move it immediately. When I measured the space myself and proved she was wrong, her harassment escalated dramatically. She began leaving increasingly aggressive notes under my windshield wipers, each one more threatening than the last. The notes progressed from polite reminders to outright demands. One read, "Final warning, move vehicle or face HOA enforcement action." Another claimed I would be fined $500 for continued violations. The most ridiculous one was a fake citation printed on official-looking paper, complete with Majup violation codes and a $75 fine payable to the Maplewood Gardens Enforcement Division. Last Tuesday, I caught Patricia taking photos of my car from multiple angles, even getting down on her hands and knees to measure the distance between my tires and some imaginary property line. When I asked what she was doing, she claimed she was documenting evidence for the HOA board meeting. That's when she first mentioned having a master key that gave her access to any vehicle in the neighborhood for enforcement purposes. Yesterday morning, everything came to a head. I was getting ready for work when I saw Patricia approaching my car with that enormous key ring. She was wearing a bright yellow safety vest and carrying a clipboard, clearly trying to look official. She spent nearly 10 minutes trying different keys in my door locks, my trunk, and even my gas cap. When nothing worked, she started getting visibly frustrated, muttering about defective locks and uncooperative residents. That's when she noticed me filming from my kitchen window. Patricia marched up to my front door and pounded on it with her fist. When I opened it, she was practically vibrating with rage. She demanded I provide her with a spare key immediately, claiming the HOA charter gave her emergency access to all vehicles. When I calmly explained that no such authority existed, she threatened to have my car towed and me evicted from the neighborhood. I remained perfectly calm, which seemed to infuriate her even more. I suggested she review the actual HOA documents instead of making up rules as she went along. That's when Patricia pulled out her phone and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher there was a dangerous parking violation that required immediate police intervention. She claimed my vehicle was blocking emergency access and that I was being hostile and uncooperative with neighborhood officials. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived in separate patrol cars. Officer Thompson, a tall man with graying temples, approached Patricia first, while Officer Davis came to speak with me. I immediately showed Officer Davis the video I had recorded, explaining the ongoing harassment situation. He watched the footage of Patricia trying multiple keys in my car locks, his eyebrows rising higher with each attempt. Meanwhile, Patricia was giving Officer Thompson an animated explanation about HOA enforcement procedures and her authority as neighborhood president. She kept waving her key ring around, insisting she had every right to access my vehicle for community safety reasons. When Officer Thompson asked to see documentation of this authority, Patricia became evasive, claiming the paperwork was back at her house. The officers exchanged glances and asked to speak with each other privately. During their brief conversation, I noticed several neighbors had come outside to watch the commotion. Mrs. Johnson from across the street approached Officer Davis and quietly mentioned that Patricia had been harassing multiple residents for months. She offered to show him similar threatening notes she had received about her garden gnomes violating community standards. Mr. Williams from next door joined the conversation, explaining how Patricia had tried to find him $200 for washing his car in his own driveway. Even elderly Mrs. Foster shuffled over with her walker, describing how Patricia had threatened to have her arrested for feeding stray cats. The officers listened carefully as neighbor after neighbor shared similar stories of Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior. Officer Thompson returned to Patricia and asked her directly about the master keys. She insisted they were official HOA property and that she had full authority to use them for enforcement purposes. When he asked to see her identification and any documentation proving her authority, Patricia became defensive and started raising her voice. She demanded to know why the officers weren't arresting me for the parking violation she had reported. That's when Officer Davis revealed that he had checked my vehicle registration and confirmed it was legally parked entirely within my property boundaries. He also mentioned that impersonating official authority and attempting to access someone else's vehicle without permission could constitute serious criminal charges. Patricia's face went white, then bright red, as she realized the situation was not unfolding as she had planned. The officers asked Patricia to explain where she had obtained the keys and what authority she actually possessed. Her story began falling apart immediately. She claimed the keys were provided by the HOA board, but when pressed for details, she admitted no such meeting had taken place. She insisted she was protecting the neighborhood, but couldn't cite any specific violations or provide documentation for her claimed authority. Officer Thompson requested Patricia's identification and began running her information through the system. While they waited, more neighbors continued approaching with stories of harassment, fake fines, and threats of legal action. The officers took detailed notes as a clear pattern of behavior emerged. Patricia stood there fuming, demanding to know why she was being treated like a criminal when I was the one violating community standards. The situation reached a breaking point when Officer Davis asked Patricia directly if she had permission to attempt entry into my vehicle. She exploded, shouting that she didn't need permission because she was the HOA president and had inherent authority over all neighborhood property. When Officer Thompson explained that this wasn't how property law worked, Patricia accused both officers of being corrupt and threatened to report them to their superiors. Officer Davis had heard enough. He informed Patricia that she was under arrest for criminal trespass, harassment, and filing a false police report. As he began reading her rights, Patricia's expression shifted from anger to shock to panic. She started protesting loudly, claiming this was all a misunderstanding and that she was just trying to maintain community standards. The officers were professional but firm as they placed her in handcuffs. As Patricia was led to the patrol car, she kept shouting about lawsuits and how the neighborhood would fall into chaos without her enforcement efforts. Several neighbors watched from their driveways, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others appeared relieved. Mrs. Johnson quietly mentioned to Officer Davis that the neighborhood might finally have some peace. Before leaving, Officer Thompson asked me if I wanted to press additional charges for the harassment campaign. I declined, figuring Patricia would face enough consequences from the current charges. He handed me a case number and explained that Patricia would likely face fines up to $5,000 plus court costs for the false police report alone. The trespassing and harassment charges could result in additional penalties and possibly jail time. Later that afternoon, I received a call from David Park, the actual HOA board treasurer. He explained that the board had been unaware of Patricia's enforcement activities and that she had been acting entirely without authorization. He apologized profusely and mentioned that an emergency board meeting would be held to address the situation. The next day, I learned that Patricia had been unanimously voted out as HOA president and banned from holding any future board positions. The most shocking revelation came a week later during Patricia's court hearing. The prosecutor revealed that the master keys were actually locksmith tools that had belonged to Patricia's late husband. She had been using his old equipment to create the illusion of official authority, even though she had no actual locksmith training or legal right to possess the tools. Patricia broke down in tears when the judge sentenced her to 2 years probation, community service, and ordered her to pay restitution to affected neighbors totaling $8,000.